Chapter 11, Zombie Apocalypse. More like family bonding. Will, Phil calls out, making a grab for Wilbur's arm, tugging at his sleeve. Wilbur pulls away from him, doesn't even look back, and runs across the road, nearly tripping in his haste to get to Dream's group. Wilbur regains his footing and runs even faster, heart slamming into his ribs as he keeps trying to tell himself he's not just seeing it right, he's only miscounting, that maybe they've made Tommy stay somewhere safe while they explore. "Dream!" Wilbur screams, angry and scared and loud, and he knows that's caught their attention quickly. Their heads whip towards him, surprised faces that are in complete disbelief. For a moment, Sapnap reaches for his gun, and Wilbur reaches for his axe, holding it tightly in his hand, glancing around for any cover. "Wilbur?" Dream calls back, and Will forgets even trying to take cover. Instead, he runs the rest of the distance and comes to a sudden stop just a few feet away, panting for air, his axe heavy in his hand. His eyes burn as he realizes again that Tommy isn't with them, and he struggles to push down that rising panic. "Holy shit," Dream swears, laughing a little in shock. He looks overjoyed to see Will. Wilbur doesn't exactly feel the same. They look like they've been going well in the weeks he's gone. They still look dirty and worn, as anyone will in the apocalypse, but they seem well-fed and well-rested, a bit more put together than how Will had remembered them. But they don't have Tommy. They stare at him as if he's a ghost, eyes wide, and Wilbur can feel himself shaking as he stands still, knuckles going white from how tightly he's holding on to the handle of his axe. Maybe he would be happy to see them too, if they had the person he's actually been searching for. "You're alive!" George exclaims, laughing a little in bafflement. He shares a look with Sapnap and Dream, Sapnap grinning back with a nod. "He's alive! Look!" Dream just stares, and at first he had been smiling just as wide as the others, but he notices how Wilbur glares at him, and the smile falters a bit. His eyebrows furrow as he takes in Will's expression and the way he's standing like he's ready to fight off a zombie. "You got out of the—" Sapnap goes to say, and Wilbur cuts him right off. "Where is he?" They pause. Dream takes the tiniest step back, and that sends alarms running through Wilbur's head. Is that guilt? Is that hesitation to tell Wilbur what he's fearing? He wants to know. He has to know, or else he's going to break apart into a million little pieces. Silence drags for a moment, too long, too painful. They exchange glances, but don't say a thing, and it pisses Wilbur off to no end. "Where is my little brother?" Wilbur demands, and they flinch at the outburst. His voice wavers near the end, and he sounds more desperate than angry. He's annoyed at how near tears he sounds, but he can't help it, because he really is going to break down if something's happened to Tommy. Why isn't he? "Listen," Dream holds his hands out slowly. "You better tell me he is safe and alive, or I swear I'm—" Wilbur speaks slowly, each word spoken as if it's physically burning him, and Sapnap cuts him off before Will can elaborate any acts of violence. "He's alive!" Sapnap blurts out, holding his hand up when Wilbur looks at him. "He's alive, Wilbur." Wilbur sucks in a breath, and it nearly comes out as a sob. The anger fizzles out into nothing, just pure relief and joy, then exhaustion. He has to pull back the emotions bubbling up inside him and shove them down, forcing himself to blink back tears, because Tommy is alive. Tommy is all right and alive, and there's no need for grief. Tommy is okay. He isn't a tiny zombie in the street. He isn't a dead body at the side of the road. He's okay. Wilbur hasn't lost him. He hasn't failed in the one thing he's been trying so hard on. He feels as if he's nearly going to break apart right there, and he barely registers the footsteps behind him until there's a familiar hand resting on his shoulder. "Will?" Phil asks, and he doesn't even look at Dream and the others. He only leans towards Wilbur. He looks worried, but Wilbur can't find it in himself to reassure the man that he's okay, just shaken. "Wilbur, breathe," Phil suggests gently, and Will nods, taking in a gasping breath. He leans forward, forcing down the last bits of emotional whiplash, and Wilbur bats Phil's hand away, taking a few steps forward. The survivors in front of him are looking at him with nervousness, and suddenly that anger is back, simmering underneath his skin. It burns and it grows, and while Wilbur is so glad Tommy is okay, he realizes that he isn't here. "Where is he then?" he asks, voice a bit calmer, but more sharp this time around. "Why don't you have him? Have they lost him?" Given him to a better group? Given him to a worse group? Have they left him behind completely? Or are they lying? Wilbur couldn't be held responsible for what he'd do if they were lying about Tommy's death to him. Well, Dream falters, shaking his head. He's not too far. We came across a large base in the city while we were traveling. There were these walls. The kid went inside and got found by the survivor who lived there, and Listen, we were not going to mess with him. His literal nickname is the Blood God, so Sapnap crosses his arms as he continues off, and Dream hits him in the arm. Ow! What? Wilbur feels quiet horror sink into his chest. And suddenly, it's not enough that Tommy is alive, because what they're saying is that he's in the company of a dangerous stranger. We didn't have a choice, George yells, throwing his hands up. He wouldn't give back Tommy, and it's not like we had anything to go against him with. We hardly even had food. You left my brother with a maniac named the Blood God? Wilbur yells, and George winces, seeming to regret saying anything. Not by choice, Dream yells back, holding an arm out in front of George. He gave us some supplies in return and told us, in return. Phil speaks up, and they all turn to him as if they've only just remembered he's there. In return, what? I mean, Dream stutters, and he looks at Sapnap, who gives a hesitant look back. No, I meant... Phil steps past Wilbur as Will slowly processes his words, and George stumbles back with hands raised in surrender. He has no clue what face Phil is wearing, but clearly it's enough for George to just step away. Sapnap looks daring, but scared. What the fuck does that imply? Phil demands, ice-cold voice. Not what you're thinking, I swear, Dream says, Sapnap glancing at Wilbur with a nervous look, as if he's asking him to make Phil stand down. Wilbur only tilts his head. Really? So how would you answer me if I asked where you got your food from? Phil asks, and Dream opens his mouth, only to shut it again as Phil goes on. He had food to spare, and he told us if we brought Wilbur back, then... Dream stops, choosing to not finish that sentence, because it might make it all much worse. He was a fucking child. Did you honestly... Hold on, Wilbur says, and there must be something in his voice, because they all stop, and suddenly the tension jumps up so high in the air that it almost feels suffocating. Phil turns to look back at Will, only then to move out of the way as Wilbur stalks forward with a quiet, furious fire in his eyes. He drops his axe on the ground, ignores the clatter of it hitting the concrete, and instead makes a direct beeline towards Dream. Dream stammers a bit, trying to walk back, only for Wilbur to grab the front of his shirt and yank him towards him. Are you saying you gave Tommy away for food? Will speaks quietly, anger barely contained. Dream hesitates, and suddenly he looks scared. Wilbur only even feels more furious at the sight. No, it's not like that. I mean, no. Repeat what you said. Say it again. Because if I heard you correctly, what you're saying is that you traded my baby brother for fucking supplies? Wilbur yells, and Dream pulls away from him, stumbling back. Wilbur grabs him again, pulls his fist back, and punches Dream right across the face. He falls backwards with the impact of it. Will goes down with him, the two of them slamming into the ground. Dream hits his back once, then seems to decide against it, and only tries to stop the hits from coming his way. Dream! George calls out in alarm, rushing towards them. Hey! Sapnap yells, reaching a hand out to pull Wilbur away, only to stop when the gun gets aimed right at his head. Whoa! No! What the fuck? Back up. Phil points with his gun, and Sapnap walks back, arms raised. George has his hands up already by the time Phil sets his gaze on him, and they stare in shock as Wilbur continues to scream. You fucking bastard! Wilbur cries, Dream coughing as he gets punched across the face again, holding out his hands to try and shield himself. You little... Stop it! Wilbur! George yells, and Sapnap shifts, hand going for the gun tucked away underneath his shirt. He doesn't want to kill Wilbur, but if he's going to keep attacking Dream, then maybe he'll just aim carefully. A bang sounds out, and Sapnap squeals, falling onto the ground as a bullet hits the ground before his feet. Don't, Phil warns, and then he turns his attention to Wilbur, who hardly even noticed the gunshot in his anger. That was my brother! Wilbur grabs at Dream's shirt, swinging at Dream's arms covering his face. His voice sounds strained, crackling, and there are tears brimming in his eyes. That was my Tommy! You
fucking idiot! How could you even—
Will, Phil tries, and Dream kicks his legs in an attempt to get Wilbur away, and Wilbur just hits him again, a strangled noise coming from his throat. We were trying, Dream tries to say, and Wilbur hits him in the mouth the moment there's an opening. You weren't doing shit! You were meant to keep him safe. You were supposed to watch over him while I was gone. I wasn't there for him, so you were supposed to make sure he was all right, and you fucked up! Dream makes a pain of noise as Wilbur lands another hit, and Wilbur ignores it entirely, pulls his arm back for another swing. Wilbur! Phil yells, and grabs at Wilbur's wrist before he can bring it down again. Dream flinches, lying still on the ground with his arms over his face, curled up on his side. His face isn't so banged up as to the point where it's bleeding, but it's rough, and Wilbur knows it's going to hurt for a few days. Will, Phil calls again, quieter, and Wilbur turns his head to him, teeth gritted so hard he thinks he might chip a tooth, and his hands trembling so badly that it looks as if he's freezing. He's barely holding back a sob, and while his face is one of fury, it's also overwhelmed with a certain devastation and disappointment that makes Phil want to just hug him. That's enough, mate, Phil says, and he pulls at Wilbur's wrist, suggesting for him to back off from Dream. Phil, Wilbur chokes out, and Phil shakes his head. That's enough. Come on. He tugs at Wilbur's arm, forcing him to stand on his feet, taking a few steps away from the man on the ground. He keeps his gun raised in the air, but also holds an arm around Wilbur, letting Will stay behind him for just a moment, trying to compose himself. Will gives a single, quiet sob into Phil's shoulder before trying desperately to shove it all down once more. Dream, George whispers, and Sapnap overlooks the risk of Phil's gun and crawls towards Dream, pulling his arms away from his bruised face. I'm okay, Dream groans, and he leans against Sapnap's knee, George also taking the risk and quickly going to kneel beside them both. That was a little deserved, I'll give him that. No, it was not, George yells, and he looks up with a scowl towards Wilbur, only then to hide behind Sapnap as Phil gives a withering glare in return. No, Dream sighs, wincing as he looks at Wilbur. Well, Wilbur freezes for a moment, as if he's about to ignore Dream entirely, but then he raises his head with interest. The guy who has Tommy. He said he wouldn't give the kid back unless we brought his brother to him. We were trying to look for you, or, some sort of evidence you were actually gone. How far is he from here? Phil asks, gun pointed down towards the three of them. Tommy? Dream blinks, grinning, even with the gun and the slight pain on his face. Not far. The thing is, he stops, making a face. There's a horde, Sapnap continues, and Wilbur raises his head towards them. A big one, blocking the roads. It took us days to figure out a safe way around, and it might still be there. They travel slow. Phil frowns, glancing towards Wilbur. We'll figure it out, Will says quietly, and he pulls away from Phil's side to walk towards them. Sapnap holds an arm over Dream with narrowed eyes. George lowers his head with a frown. What direction? Wilbur chokes out, as if his words are too much for his throat. His hands still shake at his sides, and Dream looks at them for a moment before turning his head away, giving a look to George. George hesitates, then shrugs off the backpack on his shoulders, digging into it and bringing out a map. He holds it out, then points down where they came from. The street empty and barren. We're not far from the horde. The base itself is where Sapnap drew that little face there. Wilbur blinks down at the map in his hands, and he spots it, an angry little doodle with devil horns, as if it's marking down an evil demon's hiding place. He looks to the street in front of him, staring ahead, then nodding. Okay, He trails off. He doesn't want to apologize. He's still pissed off as hell, but it feels wrong to give them a goodbye as well. He doesn't want to say anything. Good luck, Wilbur, Dream grins, and Wilbur doesn't say anything, instead just walking past them and heading down the road with a rush. Phil picks up his axe that he's left behind, and he pauses for a moment to look at the three of them, face carefully blank. Don't follow, he says, simple and calm. The threat behind it is as obvious as the gun still in his hand. Wasn't planning on it. Sapnap snarks back, and Phil smiles, before going to follow after Wilbur. He leaves the three friends behind, and they fret over Dream, who insists he'll be fine, with only a few bruises to show for it. Technoblade wakes up to a certain someone messing with his hair. He's rather comfortable where he is, and he knows he doesn't have anything urgent to attend to, so he doesn't bother trying to move. but he does try and take note of what the heck Tommy is even doing. There's a tug at his scalp from a small hand yanking at his hair, and Techno blinks his eyes open with a frown. Tommy sits beside him with a focused look, face scrunched up as he gives his attention to the task at hand, and Technoblade just wonders how he even slept through this. Surely he would have woke him the moment Tommy did. Surely he would have stirred the second there were evil little hands grabbing at his hair. "What are you doing?" Techno deadpans, and Tommy shushes in. "I'm almost done," he whispers, voice low as if Techno is still asleep. Technoblade feels only more concerned with that. "How long have you been doing whatever you're doing with my hair?" "Like, a long time," Tommy says, distractedly, humming a bit. "You sleep like a rock." There's another slightly painful tug on his scalp again. Techno huffs, and he considers getting up and batting Tommy's hands away, but he's pretty sure if he moves at all, Tommy is going to start yelling loudly, so he just sits with reluctant patience. The joys of having a child around. "Okay," Tommy trails, and there's a strand of hair that falls right into Techno's face. Technoblade moving it out of the way. "Done! Man, I'm great at this." Tommy holds his hands up with a smug look, and Technoblade doesn't even move an inch, his eyes looking at Tommy with suspicion. "What did you do?" "You should look in the mirror," Tommy says simply as an answer. And then he goes to climb off the bed, leaving Techno with no choice but to follow. When he sits up, he feels his hair sit in a weird way, and, oh, yeah, he's definitely going to have to brush the tangles out after this. By the time Technoblade reaches the bathroom, where Tommy is waiting, his hair has half fallen out of whatever strange attempt of a braid it was in, and then, when he looks at himself in the mirror, he is hardly surprised by the absolute mess on his head. "Wow," Techno deadpans, Tommy giving a stupid little grin from over the counter, both of them staring into the mirror. "Looks great," he lies, and Tommy nods. "You should totally let me style your hair," Tommy says, holding 2 fingers up and making a snipping motion. "Gonna pass on that one," Technoblade huffs, making a mental note to keep scissors away from the kid. He's not looking for a haircut anytime soon. He reaches for a brush on the counter, Tommy making a little noise of disappointment when Techno destroys his hard work. "You can redo it later," Technoblade says, and he might regret that later, but it's worth it for the way Tommy's face lights up in excitement and joy. He just focuses on brushing his hair out and stares at his own reflection in the mirror, noting the way his roots are really starting to show through the pink dye. He ought to fix it up now, since he's not going to be doing anything else today. Techno puts the brush down on the counter and goes through the cabinets underneath the sink, looking for a box of hair dye he knows he has. Tommy swipes the brush off the counter when he thinks Techno won't notice, and he simply taps the brush at his own hair, making a little face in the mirror. Techno finds the hair dye, putting it down by the sink. Tommy turns to him with a curious face. "What's that?" "This," Technoblade yawns, standing up on his feet and pulling his hair back, "is the thing that makes my hair pink." Tommy's eyes glint with a small bit of wonder. "I want my hair pink." Techno pauses, stares down at Tommy, then proceeds to regret it, because Tommy is giving his best attempt at puppy eyes. It's slightly effective. Please?" Tommy leans over the sink, snatching the box off the counter. "It'll be cool. I'll look so cool." "I don't know how your brother would react to finding you with bright pink hair," Techno deadpans. Finding the kid in the hands of a stranger is one thing, but getting Tommy back with his hair looking like a piece of cotton candy? Techno isn't so sure Wilbur will be thrilled over that idea. "He won't notice," Tommy says, shaking his head. "Really?" Tommy gives a puff of air, holding the box to his chest. "Come on! Please? Pretty please?" Technoblade hums. "I don't know. But I'll look so cool! We can match!" Tommy holds the box up, whacking Techno in the arm with it. "Think of the matching, Techno! Matching!" Techno just snorts. "All right. How about a compromise, then?" About half an hour later, Tommy's got a small lock of pink at the front of his hair, and he's incredibly proud of it. He shows it off to Floof, who proceeds to lick the kid in the face when he gets too close to the dog's snout. Techno laughs as Tommy screams, and quietly, he's happy to know Tommy has something that matches with him. "Wilbur!" Phil calls, walking quickly to catch up. "Will!" He can see Wilbur far down the street, map still held tightly in his hand as he runs far ahead. And Phil doesn't doubt for a second that he's near tears. How could he not be? He had expected to find his little brother, and now they're faced with the dilemma of finding him in the hands of a stranger who could be dangerous, cruel. Phil's wondering how Wilbur is even still holding it together. Will! Mate! Phil cups his hands around his mouth, and he spots Wilbur turn the corner, ducking away into a broken-down building. Phil feels slight worry settle onto his shoulders. He's got Wilbur's axe, and while Will does have a gun in his backpack, it's still dangerous for him to just be rushing forward on his own. He picks up the pace, running after Will, and following into the building, finding the remains of a place that once was. There's papers all over the floor, glass shards scattered by the doorway, with crunch underneath his boots as he walks over them. It's dark, and Phil takes a quick look about the place before finding a lack of Wilbur. There's a hallway that leads further into the building. Phil sighs as he goes down it, keeping an ear out for any nearby threats. He isn't really fond of buildings like this, where a stray zombie could be lurking in the shadows. No matter how many times he lives through it, it is always the same amount of terror whenever he gets grabbed by one. Wilbur! Phil calls, and he slows into a standstill, listening close and hearing the quiet sound of a sob. His heart squeezes a little in sympathy, and his feet are moving before he even thinks. Phil's gaze sweeping down through the hallway, checking each dimly lit room before finding one that's bright as it can be with how gloomy it is outside. Phil hovers by the doorway, frowning when he sees Wilbur curled up underneath the window, his face hidden away in his knees. Will? Phil says, and he's answered with a pathetic, painful sob. Go away, Wilbur chokes out, seeming to shrink in on himself, trying to be even smaller, hiding away beside the dim sunlight coming through the window. I'll be outside right now. Just go. Hey, get out! Wilbur yells, but it comes out broken, and Phil hardly moves. I just need a minute or two. Take all the time you need, Phil answers, walking into the room towards Wilbur, steps light. Mind if I sit? Like I can stop you, Wilbur mutters. Phil sits beside him carefully, placing the axe in his hand to the side on the ground. For a moment, he listens for any noise, any undead groans that could signal danger, but it's silent, and all that there is to hear is the light rainfall outside. I'm sorry we didn't find him, mate, Phil says, and Wilbur gives a pained noise, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry. Wilbur doesn't respond with any words, but his crying is answer enough, and Phil stays beside him, leaning his back against the wall. We're closer now, though, Phil says gently, tilting his head in thought. We know where he is, and all we have to do is get through the city. Then it's just a matter of getting into the base and finding him there. If we can get through the city, Wilbur sniffs, Phil smiling. We can. It's a matter of being quiet and figuring out a way around. Phil looks towards Wilbur and sees him staring straight ahead, eyes focused on nothing in particular. Cities are usually shit to even try traveling through, but I've had my own experiences with them. I've always gotten away just fine. Wilbur narrows his eyes, wiping the back of his hand against his eyes as he huffs, shaking his head. So what if Phil is lucky? So what if he's been through worse? The thing is, Wilbur knows his own luck. It's nothing like Phil's. You can leave if you want, Wilbur blurts out, and Phil freezes. If you move fast enough, you could probably catch up with Dream. What? This isn't... Wilbur sighs, his head hitting the wall as he pushes his palms up against his face. God! Look, you came along just to find Tommy, not to go die in a horde. You don't have to follow. Yes, I do, Phil scoffs, nearly offended. You expect me to just turn around and leave? I expect you to live, Wilbur snaps. You're a good person, and I know you help people, but you can't help anyone else if you're dead, and I know how hordes like this usually turn out. It'll be smarter if I'm on my own, quieter, less risk. And what if something goes wrong? Phil demands, Wilbur scowling. Then I'll handle it. And if you get hurt, then I'll deal with it. And what if you die? Phil stresses, Wilbur turning his head away, Phil pulling at his arm. What then? You'll join the horde. You'll be stuck in that city, and Tommy will wonder, "Do not!" Wilbur grabs Phil by the front of the shirt, jostling him from where he's sitting, but then he lets go just as quickly, lowering his head towards the floor. "Say that," he finishes pathetically. "Don't say that." Phil leans down with him, his hand settling over his shoulders as he rests his chin on Wilbur's head. It's nearly a hug, and Phil wants to give him a hug, but he's not sure if he should. "I'm going with you," Phil says, with a tone of finality, no room for argument. "Please don't." Wilbur grabs onto his sleeve, and Phil jerks away on reflex before resettling his hand beside Will's. "Don't. There's really nothing you can say that's going to make me turn around." "Phil, I'm not letting you go by yourself." "Look, Wilbur lets out a bitter laugh, and it's more of a sob, if anything. "I've already lost Tommy, and I have lost plenty of others long before him." "Wilbur," Phil tries, and Will ignores him as if Phil didn't even say his name. "I really don't want you to die," Wilbur admits, voice shaky and honest. "You're a really good person, Phil. I really rather not watch you die." "I'm not going to die, mate," Phil grins, chuckling. "I've gotten this far, haven't I? And you asked me to help. You wanted me to come along." "That was before I fucking got attached, Phil. Shut up." Wilbur swears, and Phil pauses. "Usually I don't care. I've stopped fucking caring because the only one who I needed to care about was Tommy. It was always Tommy, but you..." He raises his head. Do you have any idea what kind of person you are? Hell, Phil, the stories you tell. You do so much, and you care too much. There are far too little people like you in the apocalypse." Wilbur sighs, pulling away from Phil and putting distance between them. "I know how this usually goes. I have a bad track record with hordes and an even worse one with survivor groups." "We'll be lucky this time around," Phil tries. Wilbur scoffs. "My luck is shit." "Hey," Phil leans towards Wilbur, and Wilbur turns his head to him, tears brimming in his eyes once more. Phil can't help it this time. He reaches out and hugs him, tight, and Wilbur thankfully leans right into him, shoving his face into Phil's shoulder. "I'll be all right. I'm always going to be all right. I'm not going anywhere. I promise." "That's not a thing you can promise," Wilbur whispers out, and Phil just laughs. "I have a feeling I'll keep it," Phil hums, resting a hand over Wilbur's back. "You'll still have to introduce me to Tommy, you know. You've told me so much about him. It'd be rude for you to not just let me meet him." "Oh, fuck off," Wilbur breathes out, but he grins, even with the tears welling up in his eyes, the sharp guilt running through his veins. "Thank you, Phil. Really." "Like I'd let you go on your own," Phil scoffs. "I'll be here, mate." Wilbur sighs, and he thinks of the map that's still in his possession, shoved into his backpack. They agree to stay there for the night until the rain lightens up and makes it easier to get by without getting soaked. Wilbur bullies Phil into resting while he takes first watch, and Phil begrudgingly agrees, laying down as Wilbur studies the map they've acquired. It doesn't take long for Phil to wake up and realize he's alone. "Wilbur?" Phil calls, sitting up with a rush, and he swears his heart jumps upon realizing Will's backpack isn't beside him. His axe is gone, and so is the map, and... God damn it! Phil honestly should have seen that coming. "Wilbur!" Phil yells, running out of the building to go after his idiot who's decided to try and get through the city on his own.